collaborator and partner in many, many facets of life. So I just want to thank Tammy and the committee and all of you as well. In the foresight world, which is my professional background for the last 9 years, in the foresight world, there's a saying, famous saying by William Gibson, that the future is here, it's just unevenly distributed. When AAUW was first forming in 1881, which was about exactly 100 years before I was born, there were 17 women who met in Boston to discuss the needs of college-educated women, as you all know well. 101 years later, the year after I was born, in 1982, the US reached that tipping point, graduating more women with bachelor degrees than men. The future is here, it's just unevenly distributed. This saying and the history of an organization like AAUW keeps me profoundly hopeful, even in a time such as this. I've been asked just briefly to share a bit about the women who've influenced me and inspired me in my life so far, and I have to say, after doing this, I would recommend this assignment to anyone. If you go home tonight and you're having like a cup of bedtime tea and you want to just reflect on it, I feel like doing it once a year would not be enough. To really just think about who are the women who have inspired you, what have they taught you. So a few that stand out for me. First, a woman named Leon. You won't be surprised to hear there are lots of educators in the mix of the women who have made a big impression on me. This woman in particular was an educator who taught speech in the 9th grade level when I was growing up back home in Iowa. She was also a deacon in our church. She was the one who introduced me to the theology of Julian of Norwich. Other church, ladies introduced me to Mary Oliver's poetry, which some of you may be familiar with. And I grew up watching her develop a vision for one particular project in the heart of our downtown in Iowa. It was a theater renovation, very similar to the Cascade, an Art Deco, movie theater renovation. And I learned from her, just watching her, you couldn't help but see how she had this shared a vision that started off as a seed, and it took time, and it took a lot of patience. And I witnessed from her that community building often looks like 5 or 6 people in a room about 150 times in a row before things actually start to materialize. She also happened to be quite artistic. She led theater productions at the theater, which ended up being renovated. And those productions often embodied the Leonard Bernstein quote that you may be familiar with: to achieve great things, 2 things are needed: a plan and not quite enough time. And I cannot tell you how often I think of that approach to producing community events. So I learned that from her, and I also learned to tend the spiritual side of life. And I'm very grateful to have had that model. The second woman is my mom, Marnell. She is also an educator, now retired educator, 9th grade English teacher. And she always cared to make sure that every child in her classroom knew that they were valued and that they had a sense of belonging. At one point through the years when she was teaching, she decided to propose to her department chair that she develop a new unit in class. And this unit was called the Language of Politics. So you can imagine she's an English teacher, she's thinking about how to get her students engaged. And in that class, she taught her students about critical thinking, about concepts like propaganda, which most of us as 9th graders probably hadn't spent time thinking critically about. And she took such care in that time to ensure that none of her students actually knew where she stood politically. Her goal was to get her students to understand the language of politics and how to think critically about it. And I still have friends who went through that set of classes with me, who are my peers, who still say, where is your mom anyway on the political spectrum? So through my mom, I learned the importance of really trying to see and articulate from another perspective. One of the assignments in that class was to create sort of like a radio commercial for a perspective that you don't at all hold. So imagine a candidate, imagine that they're running for office. How would you, persuasively advocate for that position, even if you don't personally agree with it? And in today's political moment, that conviction that it's important to see things from another perspective, that you may not hold your own, and to be able to articulate that, has led, in my life, to a series of conversations with really smart women friends from around here, one of whom is in this room. We'll look over there, Lana. People, who I may come from a different side of the political spectrum from, and yet if people who are community-minded in our local area can't engage across dimensions of difference, what hope is there, especially if they're smart, engaged women? So that's a set of relationships that I've really come to value and appreciate. The third is really a set of people. These are the women of Yale Divinity School who were my classmates as I was going through the program there. Most of them are now clergy in different contexts across the country. And living in New Haven, Connecticut was my first experience personally of being in a place where there was a lot more racial diversity in particular than where I had grown up in Iowa. And when I went to college in Minnesota and then living abroad in Ireland and in Poland, not a lot of racial diversity in those contexts. But I really had a set of experiences there with some of my colleagues. I'm thinking especially of people like Rahel, Kaji, Vicky, Alicia, Michelle. And through those experiences with those women, I learned to more carefully take stock of the privileges that I've been afforded and to do the beginnings of some soul searching about that. Another woman who made a big impression on my life at Yale Divinity School was Pam, another educator, and she really cared about vocation and helping people think about what it is that is their gift for the world. And so I was in my third year at Divinity School, and I was on my way to trying to become a professor of religion with PhD applications and things like that. And Pam, who was my mentor on campus, came to me and she said, "There's this speaker who's coming to campus, and you need to go hear him because you think like he does, but you just don't know it." And I thought, okay, that's kind of strange. So I went to hear a gentleman named Bob Johansson, who worked for Institute for the Future, which then later became my place of employment. And the talk was about future forces likely to affect the Episcopal Church, was the specific topic. And I saw from that experience how so many people really lean forward and embrace some of the changes that are underway. Other people, really find them deeply unsettling, and so that actually galvanizes action. So it was my first formative experience of foresight, was watching my colleagues react to that talk. So what I learned from Pam is that sometimes another person can have a window into who you are better than you can yourself. So I suppose the corollary is to always be open to surprises, especially if you're a planner type. I know there's some planner types in this room, myself included. And then the last set, arriving to where I am today, I should note that this is Thursday, so Friday tomorrow is my last day at Institute for the Future, where I've been working for the last 9 years, before I'll take a week of vacation and then really immerse much more so in the Reading community full-time at the foundation. So I'm thinking a lot about my colleagues at Institute for the Future as I say my goodbyes to them. And so the last really set of women who have inspired me are 3 people in particular from there, Kathy, Marina, and Jean. This is an organization that's still unusual for our times in that a large portion of the senior leadership is comprised of women. So I have learned from them what does it look like to be a woman in leadership, because I didn't really have exposure to that in very many contexts before. And I learned a sense of intellectual generosity from them. I am learning a sense of that from them. They are the type of people who are always willing to sit down and brainstorm with you. If you have a half-baked idea that you think might be something there, and you can hand that half-baked whatever to them and actually go through a refining process. And that takes such an investment of time and of mentorship and of intellectual generosity to come to that kind of mind meld point that you get to on the other side. So I'm just taking a moment of appreciation for them in particular, and I want to think about ways that there are opportunities to do something like that with other women and people in general here in Reading. So in closing, I would like to, because Pat's wearing all the hats tonight, you're like, no, do this, no, do that. I want to give this to you, and maybe you can decide if you know who would be the best set of recipients for this. This is a book that's from Institute for the Future. My executive director, Marina Gorbis, is the author of it, and it's called The Nature of the Future. And she's really trying to characterize some of the transformations that are underway in the next 10 years. I know that there are avid readers in this group, and so I thought that this might be something that if you're interested in thinking about that future context, a lot of it has potential to apply to our area, looking 10 years ahead. So I would love to have a conversation with anybody who wants to about that if you have a chance to take a look. And just to say, I'm really honored. I mean, I looked at the list of names that Tammy showed me from the guidebook or whatever it is that she printed off, the directory that she printed off, and I'm just really humbled to be a part of that group. And I want to say thank you, and I'm really glad to be back in Reading so I can hopefully actually fold into some more of your AAUW events and meetings that I always seem to be out of town for, because I think it's really important work that you're doing. I had no idea until I reminded myself this week that it's since 1881 that this has been going on. So I'm excited to think about what are those futures today that are already here, but just unevenly distributed, that are in store for our community. So thank you very much.